Imagine the scene. It's 3 in the morning and her 6-year-old son wakes up to the screams, talking about Roman legions he should never know. Now imagine this same boy, with tears running down his face, saying that he has witnessed the death of the Son of God for more than 2 millennia. This is not the plot of a movie, but the disturbing reality that a Mexican family faced in the heart of Leon, Guanajuato, where the smell of strained coffee mixes with the incense of the ancient colonial churches. The Herrera led a simple and devout life. Joaquin, a mechanic of a Ford dealership, and Esperanza, secretary in the parish of Saint Sebastian, raised the only son, Mateo, in a house of adobe painted a celestial blue in the São João de Deus neighborhood. The boy had been born on a stuffy afternoon of April 2018, under the repique of the bells who announced the Angelus. In the early years, everything seemed normal: jokes with carts, laughs with superhero designs, rushed by the dirt yard, chasing the chickens of the grandmother medicine. But there was something in Mateo's dark eyes that intrigued Hope, a depth that did not match his tender age, as if he kept memories of pain that no child should carry. Up to the age of 4, the signs were subtle, sporadic nightmares, incomprehensible words murmured in the dark over men with Hellman shouts in a hill. Esperanza calmed him with lulis and holy water, attributing everything to children's fears. Until everything changed on Sunday, September 14, 2024, the day of exaltation of the Holy Cross. As usual, the family watched Mass in the Church of Saint Sebastian. While Father Michael ended his homily on Christ's sacrifice, Mateo, hand in hand with his mother, stopped abruptly before the colonial crucifix. His eyes filled with tears. "Son, what is it?" asked Esperanza, kneeling beside him. The answer froze his blood. "I was there, Mom. I saw when he died. I saw everything get dark." Joaquin, who was talking to a friend about car pieces, approached, hearing the stir. The smell of incense still hovered in the air, but it was the cold sweat on the forehead of the mechanic who revealed his despair. "These are things you saw on TV or heard in the catechism, son," he tried to rationalize, taking Mateo on his lap. But the boy denied his head, firm as only a child who knows the truth it may be. "No, Dad. I was there." He was afraid, but he couldn't leave. There were soldiers with bright helmets, and the sky was black as before a strong storm. On the way back, through the stone streets of the historic center, Esperanza and Joaquin exchanged glances laden with anguish. The noon sun projected short shadows under the iron balconies, and the family's family-made bad hour, marking noon, could not calm the riot in their hearts. That afternoon, while Esperanza prepared the mole peralno and the aroma of chocolate and peppers filled the house, Mateo played in the backyard as always. But at lunchtime, something unexpected happened. Seeing his father blessed himself, the boy got up in the chair and recited an unknown prayer, with a solemnity that creeps. "ABA, Heavenly Father, blesses these foods as we blessed when we were 5,000 and we all satiated." Joaquin dropped the spoon on the clay plate. "Where did you learn this, son?" Mateo looked at him with those eyes that seemed to keep centuries. "I always knew, Dad. Since before I was here with you." In the following weeks, the routine tried to keep up. Joaquin woke up at 6 with the corner of the roosters, took his rancher eggs and set off for the workshop, where the noise of the screwdrivers and the smell of burnt oil gave him a false sense of normality. Esperanza was still with her tasks in the parish, but her mind didn't rest. Each time he looked at Mateo, he relived the deep look, those words impossible for a child. The signs multiplied. Mateo began to refuse pork with an unsettling conviction. "It is not due," he said. "My people don't eat it." "Which people, my love?" asked Esperanza. "Those who followed the master," the boy answered, as if it were obvious. Until, one afternoon, while the mother swept the backyard, Mateo approached a handful of earth. "Mother, did you know that the land of Jerusalem smells different when it rains?" Esperanza stopped, his trembling hands on the broom of the broom. "How do you know that, Mateo?" Enino smiled, too nostalgic for his 6 years. "Because I was there, Mom. I walked through those streets when I was big before coming here." Each morning, Esperanza woke up with the hope that it was all a nightmare. But every day Mateo proved to him that something beyond human understanding was happening under that ceiling. And what began as a mystery would become a truth that would shake not only the family, but the very notion of what is possible. While the smell of strained coffee filled the kitchen and the October rays filtered out the window that gave to the courtyard, Mateo appeared in the doorway with an expression that Esperanza had already learned to temper. That man's gaze stuck in a child's body. "Mom," he said, rising in his green wooden chair, "do you know what happened to Bartimaeus after he recovered the view?" Esperanza's heart almost stopped. The cup of clay with boiling coffee shaved in his hands. Bartimaeus? She had heard that name in the church, of course, but how could a 6-year-old boy remember such specific details of a biblical character? "Who is Bartimaeus, my love?" he asked, trying to disguise the tremor in his voice. "He was a blind man who was sitting on the edge of Jericho," Mateo answered, with the naturalness with which other children talk about their toys. "I was always there asking for alms. I wore a torn brown tunic and smelled of sweat and dust." Joaquin, who was preparing to go to the workshop, was still, with his shirt half butt. Those details were not in any children's catechism that he knew. "When the master passed with us all," Mateo continued, playing with the sweetbread crumbs on his plate, "Bartimaeus began to scream loudly, 'Jesus, Son of David, has mercy on me.' People sent him to shut up, but he shouted even stronger." Esperanza sat heavily in the chair in front of her son. "And what happened next, Mateo?" "The master stopped and sent Peter to bring him. Bartimaeus took his blanket, it was all he had, and came running. He stumbled twice because he didn't see." Mateo's eyes shone with the memory. "When the master touched his eyes, he began to cry because he saw the blue sky for the first time." Joaquin finished buttoning his shirt with trembling hands. "Son, where did you hear this detailed story?" Mateo's answer would leave them breathless. "I was there, Daddy. I was what carried the bag with the bread. I saw when Bartimaeus's eyes were clear like the well water." That afternoon, Esperanza could not focus on work in the parish. While organizing the Heineries for Wednesday's Mass and answered the faithful who asked for prayers for the dead, Mateo's words echoed in his mind as insistent bells. He decided to do something he had never done, to investigate. After finishing his tasks, he went to the seminar library, 3 blocks from there. Father Miguel had given him permission to consult theology books normally restricted to seminarians. With trembling hands, he sought references to Bartimaeus in the Gospels. He found him mentioned in Mark, chapter 10, but what froze it was a comment in an academic edition. According to some apocryphal traditions, Bartimaeus followed Jesus after his healing, becoming one of the smaller disciples who carried provisions. How could Mateo know details that only appeared in texts that not even her, who worked in the church, knew? He returned home when the sun hid behind the hills surrounding Leon, painting the sky of orange and purple. The aroma of the newly feed tortillas that Dona Carmen prepared mingled with the smoke of the bonfires, where the neighbors burned dry leaves. He found Joaquin in the courtyard, sitting in the wooden bench under the orange tree, noting Mateo playing with his carts. But something had changed. Her husband had an expression she never saw before, a mixture of astonishment and terror. "Joaquin," whispered Esperanza, with a broken voice as he approached. "You need to hear what Mateo told me today." Joaquin had come from work earlier than usual. As he took his grease-dirty boots in the courtyard, Mateo approached the naturalness with which children share their greatest secrets. "Dad," he said, "did you know that when they crucified someone, they first gave wine mixed with gall so that it wouldn't feel so much pain?" Joaquin was paralyzed. "Do you know that, son?" "Because I saw when they offered the master," Mateo answered simply. "But he didn't want to take it. He shook his head and said he needed to feel everything to save us." What really shuddered Joaquin, however, is what came later. Mateo described with accuracy that froze the blood the sound of the blackheads crossing the wood and the meat. "It seemed when you hammers a wet, Dad, but stronger tab, was silent, a silence that hurt in the ears." He continued, "There was a soldier named Marco. He had a scar on his forehead and was always chewing something. He was the one who drawn the master's tunic." "How do you know the name of the soldier, Mateo?" asked Joaquin, with the calmer voice he got. "Because the other soldiers shouted, 'Marco, it's your turn,' when they were going to preach their feet." That night, after bedtime, Mateo with a lullaby that Esperanza had learned from his own mother, the couple stayed up in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea and trying to process the impossible. "Joaquin," sighed Esperanza, "I found something in the seminar library." The details that Mateo tells. Some are in books that even priests consider very specialized. Joaquin shook his head slowly. And this story of Soldier Marco? I have no idea where he took it. We have never seen movies about the crucifixion, and in the children's catechism they do not mention names of Roman soldiers. A dense silence filled the kitchen. Only the tick of the wall clock was heard, the heritage of the grandmother remedies, and the distant bark of the dogs of the neighborhood. Joaquin, said Esperanza finally. I think we need help. This is no longer a child. But neither knew that the next day Mateo would give them such a forceful proof that they could no longer doubt it. Something supernatural was happening in their small blue adobe house on the streets of Pedra de Leon. The dawn of October 25th arrived with a cold that penetrated to the bones. Esperanza woke up when he heard stealthy steps in the hallway. With a fast heart, he stood up without arousing Joaquin and followed the sound to the living room. Mateo was standing before the image of the Sacred Heart, hanging on the wall, whispering words in a language she did not recognize. The moonlight that entered the window projected strange shadows on his son's children's face. Mateo, what are you doing awake, my love? He asked, approaching slowly. The boy turned with tears in his eyes. I was talking to the master. If you can answer, the old man continued, adjusting the straw hat with fingers, so we will be facing something that science and faith will have to explain together. Esperanza felt the weight of the decision like a chest stone. He looked at Joaquin, whose hands, still marked by the grease, trembled slightly. Not for fear, but for the intensity of the moment. It was as if the air around him had thickened, loaded with the possibility of something greater than them. And if this is true? Muttered Joaquin, more to himself than to others. If our son was really there? Don Evaristo nodded, as if this doubt had already crossed the minds of many before them. Things, my son, who don't fit in the books of men. But if there is a chance, however small, that this boy carries memories of a time that none of us lived, paused, looking at Mateo, who, across the courtyard, stacked pebbles with an almost sacred concentration. Then we should at least listen. Esperanza took a deep breath. The smell of damp land after the morning rain still hovered in the air, mixed with the scent of the coffee that had cooled in the cup on the table. She knew that from that moment there would be no return. To accept Don Evaristo's proposal was to open a door that could take anywhere or nowhere. Okay, he said finally, with a firmer voice than he felt. But with one condition, no recordings, no strangers here. Only you, Don Evaristo. And if Mateo doesn't want to answer, we stop. The old man smiled, and his eyes, veiled by age, shone with a curiosity that seemed untouched by time. Fair. Just me. And if he doesn't want to talk, I will leave without a word. Joaquin crossed his arms, observing the chronicler with a mixture of distrust and hope. And when do you want to do that? Amazing, at dusk, said Don Evaristo, has already turned. Not to leave. When the light is smoother and the memories. He hesitated, as if they looked for the right word, they float closer to the surface. He said goodbye with a nod, leaving behind a silence that seemed to echo. Esperanza looked at her son, who now ran behind a yellow butterfly, laughing like any 6-year-old. But she knew, Mateo was not any child. And for the first time, it was allowed to believe that perhaps he carried within him a secret capable of shaking not only his little home in Leon, but the whole world. Waiting for the exact signal to break the last wire of doubt, Mateo rose from the chair with such a natural movement that he contrasted with the weight of the words he had just released. His bare feet stepped on the warm land of the courtyard as he approached Dr. Elena, as if to pull her back to the reality that everyone there except him still tried to understand. Are you crying, doctor? He asked, with an innocence that hurt more than any truth. Elena Vasquez swallowed hard, her fingers still squeezing the orange hail of the orange as if she were the only solid thing in that world that collapsed. She knelt in front of the boy, her eyes seeking his with an urgency that was no longer professional but human. Desperate. Mateo. His voice failed. How do you know all this? The boy shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. Because I was there. Her small finger pointed to her chest. In here. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still smell the bread that Mary roast, I hear the noise of the master's sandals and dust." He paused, and for a moment, his face illuminated with something that did not belong to that child. "And the fear." "I was very afraid, doctor." "Because they didn't understand." Joaquin held Esperanza by the arm as she stepped ahead, her lips shaking. Don Evaristo, immovable, watched the scene as if he already knew that this was the moment when the story would no longer be history. "Matthew 26, 6-13, murmured Dr. Elena, more to herself than for others. While Jesus was in Bethany, in Simon's house, the leper approached him, a woman with a Valius scent alabaster vase that shed over her head. She lifted her eyes, damp, for hope. Your description of the bottle, the perfume, the reaction of Judas, is word by word in the Gospels. But the name Samuel, his breath was intertwined. This is not in the Bible. It is only in the texts of Nag Hammadi. In Copto. A hot wind blew by the courtyard, making the orangeiro leaves whisper like pages of an old book being turned. Mateo, indifferent to the turmoil he caused, took an orange that had fallen to the ground and began to peel it with agile fingers. "The master said that important things need not be written to be true," he said, offering a Dr. Elena. She didn't accept him. He couldn't move. "And what else did he say, Mateo?" asked Don Evaristo, the severe voice as the troop of a storm approaching. The boy bit his lip, as if hesitated not out of fear, but for an ancient pain that was still hurting. "That the kingdom is not a place." Her gaze got lost on the horizon, besides the home walls of the house. "It's like when we close our eyes and feel that it is everywhere at the same time." Only, he lowered his head. "But people prefer to fight for pieces of land than to understand this." The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled cry of Esperanza, which finally let the tears that had been accumulating since Don Evaristo had crossed his gate for the first time. "My God," Joaquin whispered, running his hand over his face as if he wanted to erase the expression of stamped astonishment in him. "What do we do now?" Dr. Elena got up, the trembling knees. His gaze went from Mateo to his parents, and then to Don Evaristo, as if he sought an anchor amid the wreck of everything he believed to know. "Now," he said, with a firmness that contrasted with the tremor in his hands. "We tasted." Among the dried branches of a fig tree, about 100 steps from the Golgotha. "I couldn't look," Mateo continued, his voice so thin that he was barely heard over the wind that shook the orange tree leaves. "But I heard everything. The screams of those who were preached, the cry of women, the sound of the sea. Tell us hitting, and then, when the sun hit it, it was so dark that I thought the world was over." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. Even the birds seemed to have contained the corner. Dr. Richardson, who until then kept a clinical stance, felt a chill through his spine. His fingers shook slightly over the record label button, as if he doubted the device could capture something so impossible. "Mateo," Father Martinelli leaned forward, his blue eyes now no longer inquisitors, but charged with almost painful gravity. "You said them. Who else was being crucified that day?" The boy closed his eyes, as if revamped the scene behind his eyelids. "Two. One to the right of the master, another on the left. The one on the left cursed, said that if it was the Messiah, he should save himself. The one on the right, his voice failed. The right one just asked, 'Remember me when you enter your kingdom.'" "Dismissed," Doctor whispered. Elena, her hands pressed against her lips. "The good thief. Did you turn to look at him?" asked Father Martinelli, his voice hoarse. Mateo nodded slowly. "He was bloody, his arms stretched like broken branches. But his eyes," the boy swallowed hard. "His eyes had no hatred. Only hope." Esperanza, who had previously been silent, soaked softly. Joaquin squeezed his fists until his fingers were white. It was too much. Too much for an 8-year-old boy to carry. Too much for anyone to carry. "Mateo," Dr. Richardson interrupted, his voice carefully neutral, as if he feared breaking the spell. "You mentioned the darkening of the sun. The Gospels describe this as a supernatural phenomenon. In your memory, there was an explanation, natural?" The boy looked at him as if the question was absurd. "It was not magic. It was God. He reached out his hand, small, shaky, as if he could touch the memory in the air. The sky was black like pitch at 3 in the afternoon. People shouted, thinking it was the end. Even the Roman soldiers were afraid. One of them, a centurion named Longinus, looked at the master and said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Father Martinelli signaled the cross, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Dr. Elena, who had recovered from fainting with cadaverous pallor, now had her cheeks wet. Not by tears of doubt, but something much more dangerous, sure. "And the veil of the temple?" she asked, her voice broken. "Were you there when he ripped himself?" Matteo nodded. "I heard the noise from inside the city, like a giant fabric being torn in half. The priests ran out like crazy, saying that God's presence had abandoned the most holy place." He lowered his head. "That's when I learned that everything was over. And that I would also have to go back." "To go back?" Dr. Richardson scored the word in the block with such a strong trace that he tore the roll. "Do you mean you chose to be born again?" "It was not a choice." Matteo looked at his parents for the first time since the session began. "It was a mission." He said I would have to tell. That the world had forgotten as it was real. Joaquin held hope for his shoulders, as if he feared that she or herself was taken by the current of those words. The air smelled the wet earth and bitter oranges. And suddenly everyone knew nothing would be as before. "Maestro Samuel?" he asked, caressing the boy's dark hair, still damp in the afternoon bath. Matteo shook his head, but his fingers continued to draw lines on the earth, as if they sought something among the grooves. "Sometimes I miss a smell of bread baking in the clay oven, when Maria sang as she kneaded her flour. But it's like remembering her grandfather who died before I was born. You know it existed, but it doesn't hurt anymore." Her voice was light, almost distracted as she added a 3-legged dog to the drawing, the same as she barked to her postman every morning. Esperanza smiled, but her eyes burned. That was Matteo she had always wanted to protect, a boy who laughed at the stumbling blocks, who ran after lizards on the wall, who piely believed that the father was the strongest man in the world just because he could carry 2 bags of cement at once. And yet, she touched the rosary in her pocket, the wooden grains worn by use. How could I forget the day when that same girl had the taste of vinegar to the sponge, the weight of the cross on Simon's shoulders, the brightness of Jesus' eyes when he looked to the sky and said, "Consummatum est"? "Mama," Matteo pulled his sleeve, interrupting the whirlwind of memories. "Father Miguel said tomorrow has a procession. Can I go with Dad to carry the small cross?" She pulled him close, inhaling the smell of earth and soap. "Of course, mi tesoro." But as he hugged him, his fingers trembled. Because he knew that lightweight, hard-painted wooden cross was not just a symbol for his son. It was a shadow of what he had already carried. And although Matteo could have forgotten the details, his body remembered. His hands, those same hands that now drew houses on dust, still had the marks. That night, while Joaquin broke down drives of engines and Esperanza pretended to sleep, she heard the boy murmur in the next room. They were not words, but a guttural sound, almost a lament, as if somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, Samuel still cried through the sun-burned Jerusalem. And then, as sudden as a sail that goes out, the silence came back. The next morning, the sky over Leon was of a cruel blue, the kind that promises relentless heat. Matteo woke up with bright eyes, wearing the white shirt that Esperanza had passed the iron the night before, her spotted hair back with water and comb. "Today I will be Dad's best assistant," he said as he stuck his feet on his spending leather shoes. Joaquin, already with the small cross on his shoulders, looked at his son with an expression that mixed pride and something more, something that only a father who sought his boy described the agony of a god could understand. "Come on, Campion," he said, adjusting the weight of the wood. "But remember, it's just to the church. No running." Matteo nodded, seriously, and reached for the tip of the fabric that covered the cross. Their fingers, small but surprisingly firm, closed around the wood as if they knew it for centuries. And when the procession began, with the bells trendy and the smell of incense mingling with the street dust, no one but Esperanza noted that for a moment Matteo's footsteps faltered. That his eyes, for a second only, turned to the horizon as if they sought something beyond the Guanajuato hills. As if, somewhere between present and eternity, he still heard the sound of a crowd shouting, "Crucify him!" And the echo of a voice responding, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they do." But then he blinked, shook his head like a flyaway, and smiled at his father. "Come on, Daddy. We'll be left behind." And so, between the weight of the wood and the sun that burned his back, Mateo Herrera, who had already been Samuel Ben Aaron, walked ahead, leaving behind every step the ghosts of a life that the world could never understand completely. "Why el maestro, Mateo?" The mother's question came soft, as if she feared breaking the stillness of that moment. The boy smiled with a serenity that even the years had not been able to erase completely. "I don't miss, Mama. Because he never left." He touched his chest with his small hand, then pointed to the sky, where the clouds intertwined in ephemeral shapes over the stone lion of the source. "He's here. And here too." In the following weeks, the last onlookers and investigators were fading, like the tide that retreats after a storm. The Herrera's house was just a blue adobe house in the San Juan de Dios neighborhood, four walls that housed a common family, guardian of such a deep secret that they didn't even dare to name him out loud. Don Evaristo still appeared from time to time, always on a pretext related to his research, but the truth was that he had clung to that family in a way that he could not explain himself. Until, on a hot afternoon, while I enjoyed an olla coffee in the courtyard with Esperanza and Joaquin, he took a yellowish letter from his pocket. "Father Martinelli wrote to me," he said, unfolding the paper carefully. Mateo's case was classified as inexplicable authentic phenomenon by the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. Joaquin frowned, the dirty fingers of real estate on the cup. "And what does that mean, Don Evaristo?" The old man smiled, as if he carried a weight he could finally deposit. "Signa that the church has. Officially, what happened here was real. That Mateo had access to memories that science cannot explain. What something divine touched him." Esperanza felt a shiver travel through her spine, mixed in fear, as if she had been chosen to carry a flame she could not erase. "What if anyone finds out? What if they disturb it again? Will they make that public?" he asked, his voice thinner than he intended. Don Evaristo shook his head. "No, Hijita. These cases are in the Vatican special files. But when Mateo grows up..." I made a break, as if he wore every word. "If one day he wants to serve the church, the doors will be open. All doors." That night, after lying Mateo with a lullaby song about angels that sail for the good children, Esperanza and Joaquin were in the courtyard, packed by the breeze that brought the perfume of the neighboring jasmine. The stars about Leon shone with almost insolent intensity, as if they knew of secrets that humans would never unravel. "We've done right, Esperanza?" Joaquin broke the silence, the fixed eyes in the firmament. "Delaying all those doctors, those priests, would our son question as if he were a mystery to be deciphered?" She held his hand opera, marked by the years of work in the craft, and felt the weight of a certainty that did not need words. "We had no choice, me love. When God puts something in your hands, you cannot return. You can only take care. And now? What will be from Mateo?" "Now," Esperanza smiled in the darkness, "he will grow up. Go study, you will laugh, you will fall in love, you will have your own children. It will be a man like any other. But it won't be. Because inside it will always burn the memory that death is not an end, that love is stronger than time. That there are promises that even forgetting can erase." A year later, Mateo turned 8. The party was simple, neighborhoods of the neighborhood, some cousins from Guadalajara, and the chocolate cake he had asked with insistence. As he blown his candles, Esperanza watched the face of his son lit by the flames, and he realized that there was no more trace of Samuel Ben Aaron in that boy. Mateo Herrera was just Mateo, third-year student, Leon fanatic fan, football sticker collector, son of a mechanic and a parish secretary. An ordinary boy with ordinary dreams. Until, when the last guests went and the house returned to silence, Mateo approached his mother with something hidden in his hand. I found this under my pillow." It was a smooth and perfectly round white stone that shone with its own light under the kitchen lamp. "Where did you come, mi vida?" The boy shrugged, but for a moment. "I don't know. But when safe, I feel as if someone is protecting me. Much, far away. Esperanza kept the stone in the same place where she hid the photos of Mateo baby, Vatican documents, and Dr. Vasquez. Treasures of a truth that had torn the veil between the possible and the impossible. The years have passed. Mateo grew up, graduated in elementary school with good grades, entered the gym, discovered a passion for history and began to help his father on weekends. Samuel Ben Aaron's memories became like a living dream of childhood. Although he knew it had happened, but he could no longer play clearly. Until, on Leon's quiet nights, when the wind shook the orange tree leaves that was still bearing fruit in the courtyard of the blue adobe house, sometimes something was heard. A murmur in Aramaic. A lullaby fragment from a time that did not belong to this world. Because there are truths that memory cannot erase. There are loves that challenge death. And there are promises that are fulfilled in ways that reason could never anticipate. And in a small house, in a simple neighborhood of Guanajuato, it was proof that when the divine desires it, a soul can return. Not to be worshipped, not to be studied, but to whisper to the world that miracles have never ceased. They just wait. They expect the right time to reveal themselves.